I want you guys to remember this. Always remember that we are the descendants of men who would not be ruled over. That's the first step. The Constitution is not a document for the government to restrain the people. It is an instrument for the people to restrain the government. Every part of the Constitution is important. If you let the government ignore parts of it, they will soon ignore all of it. These are the people who rule over you. And it's gotten worse in the last few years. I'm going to go over something here with you guys, and I want you to pay attention. As soon as I get this thing set up right. This is the Federal Firearms Act. Okay, it says here, where does the federal government get its constitutional authority to enact laws such as the National Firearm Act, which was, 1968, which has been codified to Chapter 44 of Title 18 of the United States Code, upon whom are such laws operable and where? Since a careful reading of the Constitution reveals that the federal government has no specifically delegated authority to regulate firearms. So where does the federal government authority to regulate come from? Okay, now it says here. Like over the last 30 years, what is wrong with this doggone thing? It says here, over the last 30 years, laws concerning firearms have become a matter of public policy with no regard to the constitutional element involved. Why aren't more people challenging it? Because this nation has an they have a complete understanding that the federal judiciary is corrupt and will not honor the Constitution when required to do so. So that's why they don't go out and challenge this stuff. So anyway, I got to doing some looking up. What the government did, since the Congress has no authority to mess around with your firearms. I mean, if you look at the Second Amendment, they are not allowed to infringe upon your right. So they didn't have the authority, so they did this under the color of law. As you might notice, if you try to find the title Federal Firearms Act associated with 18 U.S.C. Chapter 44, you will not. Why are they showing it here? Well, the Federal Firearms Act was enacted in 1938 and was originally codified to Title 15. So what's Title 15? It's entitled Commerce and Trade. Okay? From 1938 till 1968, the Federal Firearm Act was within Title 15. That's 30 years. Despite the law operating just fine for 30 years, someone decided it was no longer proper to have that law contained in Title 15. Well, because the government realized that their jurisdiction limits were far too easy to discern when the law was within the Commerce and Trade title. It wasn't moving in interstate or foreign commerce. The U.S. didn't have any jurisdiction over it. However, by moving the Act to Title 18 and thus discontinuing the Act from the title of Commerce and Trade, there are very few clues left to the law's original intent and its constitutional limitations. Anyway, Chapter 44 of Title 18 has been amended many times, most notably by the Gun Control Act of 1968. Okay, having said this, there's an amazing, well, let's see. They kept changing things around from the Title 15 to Title 18, and then they changed everything around so it looks like they have the authority. Looks like they have the authority to move things around. And they are not allowed to do that. Like I said, they never had the power, but they give themselves the authority by sticking this in these other titles and chapters and stuff until it looked like, wow, they give themselves authority. We did not give them the authority. The Constitution did not give these people the authority. But yet, it's there. Now, if you look at Marbury versus Madison, anything that is conflict with the Constitution is null and void of law. Clearly, a secondary law to come in conflict with the supreme law was illogical. For certainty, the supreme law would prevail over any other law, and certainly our forefathers had intended the supreme law would be the basis for all laws. And for any law to come in conflict would be null and void. It bears no power to enforce. It bears no obligation to obey. It completely nullifies the Brady Bill. All these bills, people, they have the color of law. They are not law. Just because Congress passed this and then changed these codes and chapters and stuff around and give themselves more power, that's against the Constitution. They're giving themselves authority over something that they have no authority over. Like statutes, acts, and ordinance and codes are not law. There's no provision in the Constitution that was designed to be without any effect. Anything that's in conflict is null and void of law. Period. Hang on a second, people. I got something I'm going to see. Oh yeah. Although it is manifested that an unconstitutional provision in the statute is not cured because it was included in the same act with valid provisions, and there is no degree of constitutionality to it. I'll show you right here. It's hard to get this thing. Any unconstitutional provision in a statute or a law is not cured just because it was in the same act with valid provisions, and there is no degree of constitutionality to it. The actual existence of a statute prior to determination that is unconstitutional is an operative fact and may have consequences which you cannot ignore. When a statute has been in effect for some time, is declared unconstitutional, questions of rights claimed to have been vested of status prior to determinations seem to have finally be acted upon accordingly, public policy in the light of the nature, so on and so forth. What this means is they can't do this. They're putting themselves in peril. No public policy of a state can be allowed to override the positive guarantees of the U.S. Constitution. Since the Constitution is intended for the observance of the judiciary as well as other departments of government and judges, they are sworn to uphold its provisions. The courts are not at liberty to overlook or disregard its commands or counteract evasions thereof. It is their duty in authorizing proceedings to give full effect to the existing Constitution and to obey all constitutional provisions, irrespective of their opinions to the wisdom of the desirability of such provisions, and irrespectively of their consequences. Thus it is said the courts should be on our alert to enforce the provisions of the United States Constitution and guard against its infringement by legislative laws or otherwise anything that's in accordance with the basic principles of law. The rule is the duty is a proper case to declare a law unconstitutional, cannot be declined, and must be performed in accordance with the delivered judgment of the tribunal before which the validity of the enactment is directly drawn into question. If the Constitution prescribes one rule and the statute another in a different rule, it is the duty of the courts to declare the Constitution and not the statute governs the case before them in judgment. You've got to understand the Constitution, the Bill of Rights. You really have to understand your own rights. That's why I keep telling people, for God's sake, read the Constitution. These boxes have kept us free, people. You've got the soap box, the ballot box, the jury box, and the cartridge box. I'm really upset that we allowed the Congress to give themselves more authority. That really upsets me. You know, years ago, people, by signing the Declaration of Independence, 56 Americans pledged their lives and their fortunes and their sacred honor. It was no idle pledge. 9 signers died of wounds during the Revolutionary War. 5 were captured, were imprisoned. Wives and children were killed, jailed, mistreated, left penniless. 12 signers' houses were burned to the ground. 17 lost everything that they ever owned. No signer defected. Their honor, just like their nation, remains intact. Now, let's get over here. We got some problems. Senate Democrats demand Supreme Court nominee not be unduly influenced by the U.S. Constitution. Now, these are Democrats. These are your elected officials. Time and time again, we find progressive laws getting struck down. It's always the ones that the Constitution is against. These right-wing judges don't think for themselves. They just do whatever the Constitution says, and it's time for that to end. Chuck Schumer. And you got Pocahontas here, Elizabeth Warren. We need judges to be advocates of progressive laws, not people who will bow to the whims of the Constitution, pitting its extreme values of freedom of speech and freedom of religion against our agenda. Cory Booker. We're sick and tired of the Constitution sitting in the National Archives, manipulating everything that we do. And these people took an oath to uphold the Constitution of the United States. And then they're trying to undermine our Constitution and destroy our nation. And it's up to you people to get off your butts. Remember, we are the descendants of men who would not be ruled over. I hope this helps you guys a little bit, but Congress does not have the authority to pass firearm laws. They give themselves that authority. That's not in the Constitution. Thanks for watching.